Hello, this video will provide a quick overview for some considerations and recommendations when facilitating an effective IEP meeting remotely. I will be using a screen capture application to share my entire screen as I present this video so that you can watch me go through some of these things as I talk about them and see an example of what that might look like. The first thing you're going to want to do as you get ready for your IEP meeting is even before you begin, you want to choose the platform you're going to use for your IEP meeting. Different districts are using different platforms for their remote meetings. Two that are very common right now are Google Hangout and Zoom. And what I would say is if your district has specific guidance on which platform they would like you to use, obviously use that. If they don't, and if they leave it up to you, my recommendation would be to try out both of these platforms and see what you're most comfortable and familiar with. Try using the different features of them, try sharing things, inviting other people to join you, and see how comfortable you are with the different platforms to help you decide what you want to use for your meetings. I've listed here some pros and cons of each platform. Something to keep in mind with the Google Hangout platform is that it's fairly easy to set up a meeting, to share a link to that meeting with others, and then parents have the ability to call into that meeting from a phone. They don't need to have a webcam or a smartphone to be able to join the meeting. There's a number that they can call and participate as though they were on a phone call. Zoom doesn't have that option, but Zoom does have the option to view all the participants of the meeting fairly easily, which is a nice feature. It really helps you feel like you're in the room with the others as the meeting is happening. So different things to consider with different platforms, but again, I would say just try different ones and see how you feel about them. Once you've decided what platform you're going to use for your meeting, the next thing that you're going to want to do is schedule that meeting. So connect with the parent or guardian, and I would determine first how comfortable they are with the platform that you've chosen for your meeting. Some parents have been using these platforms and learning them for lots of reasons, just the way that we are. And so they might have some level of comfort with them, and other parents might never have used them before. And so really being able to walk them through what to expect, how the invite will look and how they access the meeting, what to expect when they join the meeting, things like that. You can also offer to help them set up the application or to help them navigate to that meeting if that's something that they would like, and really just answer any questions that they have about that platform. The next thing I would do is to remind the parent that they're allowed to invite others to be part of the IEP meeting. In the past, parents might bring others with them to the meeting and just show up with them. And so now what I would tell parents is if they want to share the link that you give them to the meeting, then basically that's their way of giving consent for that person to participate. So you cannot share the link with somebody else, but the parent can share the link, and that's the parent inviting that person to the meeting. Then next, make sure that your invitations for the meeting go out. You have required team members for IEP meetings. Those required team members do not change just because the meeting is remote. So you do need to have general education teachers at the meeting, as well as anybody who has input for the IEP or anybody who provides direct services to the student. If there's a required team member that can't be present at this meeting, you're going to want to make sure that you inform the parent of that when you're setting up the meeting, and give the parent an opportunity to change the date of the meeting or to give their consent for that person to be absent. And then lastly, you're going to want to send out the invitation to the meeting to the parent and other participants. You will be sending it digitally, and so what I would do is make sure that parents understand what that's going to look like and how to access the meeting from that invitation. And then I would also ask them if they would like a reminder call or email prior to the meeting. My other recommendation prior to the IEP meeting is to send home a draft of the IEP. I like to send it to the parent or the guardian with sufficient time to review this IEP draft, and so I would say at least 24 hours gives them that time. If the parent has requested a paper copy of the IEP or a paper copy of the draft that you'll be going over, I would just determine the feasibility of that. Some districts have people in buildings or at district office who are willing to print things out and mail them to families. That's less feasible for some districts, and so if that's something the parent is requesting, I would just work with your district to see how plausible it is to make that happen. And then when you send a draft of the IEP, I would also include a copy of the parent rights to make sure that they have that copy. And I've linked it right here, but you should be able to find that through ODE's website as well. And then when you send the draft, have this be an opportunity to remind the parent of the meeting and to ensure that they, again, have the link and the number to call in so that they can participate without any trouble. So when it comes to the actual IEP meeting itself and facilitating that meeting, the first thing you're going to want to do is prepare yourself to be the facilitator. So have your chosen platform ready, have practice sharing the screen and using the different features, make sure that you're familiar and comfortable with it, and then you're going to want to assign somebody to take minutes so that you don't have to be responsible for facilitating the meeting, sharing your screen, taking notes into the IEP, and then also taking minutes. If possible, I would also assign somebody to monitor the chat box for any questions. I'll talk a little bit more about the chat box in a minute, but it is a good idea for larger groups to be able to have people post comments or questions into the chat box and then have somebody monitor that for you so that you can continue to present and not have to worry about what's happening in the chat box. That way, if somebody else is monitoring it, then they can say, oh, I've got something to add here. The next thing I would recommend is going ahead and opening up ORSPED or Oregon Special Education System and navigating directly to the IEP prior to the meeting. This just ensures that student information is not shared that you don't intend to be shared. And then I said here, just make sure that other tabs are closed or hidden and use a separate window for the IEP. And what that does is it really makes it so that you're protecting the confidentiality and making sure that you're not, again, sharing something you don't intend to share. So what that would look like is if I have ORSPED open up here, I can just click on the tab and I can pull it down and it creates a separate window for that. And if I click Alt-Tab, I can toggle between that window and the one I was just in, which is a very effective way to switch back and forth between screens. The other nice thing about having it in its own separate window is that then when I go to present the IEP, I'm making sure that that's the only thing I'm sharing. And I'm going to show you an example of what that looks like in just a minute. The last thing I would recommend is joining the meeting 5 minutes early so that you're the first person there and you can welcome people as they arrive. So when it comes to the meeting itself, start with welcome and introductions and let this be an opportunity to make sure that everybody knows how to mute and unmute themselves. Have everybody practice that as they introduce themselves. I would also ask everybody to stay muted unless they have something that they want to share. And this just ensures that there's less feedback or environmental noise impacting everybody's experience of the meeting. And then lastly, make sure everybody knows where the chat box is located and how to use it. You can have everybody practice typing something into the chat box if you'd like. And like I said, with larger groups, it might be worth having people share their questions and comments in that chat box and then pausing the meeting to address those concerns rather than having everybody jump in as they think of something. If somebody is excused from the meeting, make sure that the parent is, again, aware of that excusal and has given their consent. Your district might have specific guidance for you on how to get this parent consent, since we will not have a written agreement right there for the parent to sign. And so check with your district on how they want to document that consent. And then my next recommendation is to share only the IEP window and not your entire screen. Again, this protects confidentiality and it makes sure that they aren't seeing anything on your desktop or other student information that you don't intend for them to see. I'm going to show you an example of what that looks like. So if I go here, I've set up a fake meeting for myself and I can click on this meeting. It's getting it ready. It's going to show me a preview of what my face looks like. And I'm going to join. If others were here or joining me, they would pop up right here, but it's just me and myself today. And so this is what it would look like. When I get ready to present, I push this button down here, and it gives me the option of presenting my entire screen or just a window. My entire screen is tricky because I can inadvertently click on something and everybody will see it, but a specific window means I'm only sharing what I intend to share. And so because I already broke out this ORSPED website into its own separate window, and because ideally I've navigated to the IEP already, I can just click on that and share it, and I'm not going to share anything else. Even if I click on a different screen, nobody else in the meeting will see it. When I'm in presenter view, up here shows that everybody can see that ORSPED page, and then as the person presenting, again, I can Alt-Tab over here, and if this was the IEP, I could type into it directly. If I wanted to rejoin the meeting and look at everybody's face, again, I could just Alt-Tab. They can still see what I'm presenting, but now it gives me the option to look at faces and then to go back over here into the ORSPED again. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and then leave this meeting. As you can see, that's a pretty simple way to go back and forth, to type directly into the IEP, and then to also feel like you're participating in the meeting. Once you've started this meeting, again, offer parent rights, explain the purpose of those rights. If you want to share your screen, you can, and you can talk about what those rights are and why they protect the parent, just like you would for any other IEP meeting. Or if you'd like, you can drop a link to it into the chat box of the meeting. And then lastly, I mentioned this a minute ago, but you can type changes directly into ORSPED while you're presenting that screen. And that really helps people to kind of stay on track with what we're working on. If you're making notes that are going to turn into changes later and you'd rather not type those directly into ORSPED, then I would just ask the note taker to write them down so you can revisit them later. When you're talking about the content of the IEP, you want to keep in mind that parent concerns might include any learning or behavior that's related to the current pandemic and shutdown. So you want to note those concerns, even though there might not be much we can do about them at the moment. It is something that is a part of the child's current learning experience. You want to use available data that you have for the student gathered prior to 3/13 when schools shut down to determine present levels and goals. And you might need to note that data will be gathered as schools reopen again, and that IEP goals might be amended or adjusted as needed. And make sure that the parent understands that as well. And then lastly, you're going to want to consider the learning needs and any SDI, accommodations, related services based on a typical learning environment, which is the school environment, and not based on the child's current learning situation at home. When it comes time to end the meeting, you want to make sure that everyone has shared their input and that no questions remain. Ask the parents if they're comfortable with a digital copy of the final IEP being emailed, or if they would prefer a hard copy. Provide a timeline for the final paperwork to be sent to the parent, which will include the final IEP as well as a prior written notice. And then stop your screen share and thank the parent face-to-face for their participation in the IEP. You should be the last one to leave the meeting just in case anybody has any last-minute questions. I have here a note on consent and signatures. ODE gave some guidance around consent and different ways that districts can obtain that consent, and there's a link to that right there. Just keeping in mind that you can get electronic or digital signatures through different software. You can have parents write very specific emails or other participants, if needed, very specific emails that give their consent or agreement with a decision that was made. Your district should have guidance on that, and so that is something that I would ask them about. And then lastly, additional considerations. Meetings shouldn't be recorded. If the parent asks for the meeting be recorded, just inform them that meeting minutes are being taken and can be shared. Your district could have other guidance around recording meetings, and so I would check with them on that. You want to make sure that you're maintaining the confidentiality of this meeting to the best of your ability. So attend the meeting from a different location, use headphones, be mindful of what appears behind you, and then also be aware that the parent might have other people in the room that don't appear on their camera, which might include the student themselves or other family members. And so being mindful of what you're saying and being mindful that there could be more going on than what's just apparent in the screen. The prior written notice that is sent with the IEP should document that this was a remote IEP meeting and it occurred during the COVID-19 pandemic. And this is just so that in the future, when you look back on this meeting, you can understand more fully the decisions that were made around this IEP and the unique circumstances of this remote meeting. And then lastly, if the parent chooses to suspend the IEP meeting until a face-to-face meeting can occur, which might happen, just make sure that you document this request in a prior written notice and that you check in with your district to see if there's anything else that they would recommend in the event of that parent wishing to suspend the meeting. Again, this is just a brief overview of some things to keep in mind if you're holding an IEP meeting remotely. There are other things that might come up. Again, I would just check with your district around specific language they would like you to use or specific considerations as you develop goals during this time.